Well, welcome everyone to church this morning. Welcome everybody watching online and everyone that's here. I'm so happy to have everyone here. Today, I am especially excited for today's message. I've been studying this for the last 2 weeks, and yesterday I already knew that I knew it, but then I just wanted to have a moment in God's presence, and I put some worship music on, and it just happened. I just had that moment, and I was almost like, tearing up and just having that. And it's going to be such a powerful thing. And I want to relive what I lived last night here with my church family. And I pray that that's going to happen. So it's going to be something good. It's going to be something good. Today, we are going to continue talking about Jesus. And we are going to be focusing on the book of Luke. Several things that Jesus taught in the book of Luke. But today, just like in the Red Letter Challenge, this week we're going to start the week of being. And today I want to talk about the subject matter of the heart behind the faith. The heart behind the faith. This is something that you have to catch Jesus really talking from his heart in everything that he said, in identifying certain things that he could pick up on, certain nuances that he could see clearly that sometimes for us we just couldn't. But then in that we can learn what Jesus really sees and why he says what he says. And there's always something behind the scenes happening when Jesus is doing whatever. There's always so much more when Jesus is doing something. It's not just what happens. It's not just what he says. There's always something so much more. And as we saw last week, the number one focus of Jesus was humans, is humanity, is us. And so there has to be something in the heart. There has to be something that is the foundation, is the basis of where our faith starts. So today I want us to dive into the faith behind, the heart behind the faith. I want us to go to Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10, verse 38. And we're going to read a pretty famous story. This story is actually found in the book of John as well, but in John it's different. Luke, as you know, he wrote the gospel after the fact of Jesus, wanting to fact check everything. He was a fact checker, he wanted to go into the history of it and really get as much information as he could. And so this story is one of those, is in verse 38, and it reads this. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." Now, in John, this is the story where Mary washes Jesus' feet and pours the alabaster, right, the perfume on his feet. But in this part, in Luke, it just goes to the nitty-gritty, just what was happening between these two sisters and in the home. And in this story, something amazing happens that we see an insight before Jesus starts his preaching circuit, his tour, all the teachings. He has this moment in a home with a family, and he starts addressing the heart behind the faith. The heart behind the faith. And today, I want us to realize something very important. I want us to realize that there is something going on in our hearts that is important to Jesus. There is something going on in the inside, in the uttermost inside, that is important to Jesus. And he wants to address this. He wants to figure it out, because out of that heart of faith will be produced. In that heart, in that soil is where the seed of faith is going to land. And there has to be a preparation to the heart in order for good faith to come out of it. And so, right now, I want us to understand that we are going to be confronted by certain things that are in our heart. And so today, I want us to do just a little interaction wherever you're at. I want everyone to close your eyes and bow your heads. Wherever you're at, just close your eyes and bow your heads. And I am going to ask you a question. I am going to ask you a question. How is your heart today? Truly, how is your heart? You know, there is something important that happens in our heart. King David, the psalmist, wrote it this way. He said in Psalm 119, he says, I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. But he's talking about where the word of God, where the words of God go to. It goes to our heart. We see also that a little bit before this story that we just read in Luke chapter 12, in Luke chapter 6, Jesus gives a teaching. And the teaching is this: a good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart. And then at the end, he goes on to saying, for the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Something is there where Jesus, before starting his preaching series, before starting his tour, right, he's starting to address man's heart, because the heart needs to be ready for the word. The heart needs to be ready for the word. And as I'm saying this, for a lot of us that you know have been a Christian for quite some time, maybe some verses are popping into our minds. Maybe some stories are popping into our heads about this relationship that the heart has with the faith. And we need to know this, because as a young church, as a rookie church, as the biggest small church in San Diego, we need to have the right heart to produce the right faith. We have to have that heart check. And today is going to be a heart check. Where is that seed of faith landing? Is my heart in the right place? And so we see this story where Jesus comes to a home. Martha, who opens her home, we know that she's the older sister because she was the one mentioning that opens the house. Mary is the younger sister. And they have this interaction with Jesus. And we're going to learn a lot by this interaction. So the first thing I want to touch on is a task-driven faith. A task-driven faith. We see this in Martha. We see this in the heart that says there's too many things to do. There's just a ton of things that I must do because Jesus is here. Jesus is here and I must do. I must do a bunch of things. I must try to put my best foot forward, try to impress as much as I can Jesus. Why? Because Jesus is here. I have to be on my best behavior. I have to do the best plating on the dish and just make sure that everything is ready. Why? Because it's a task-driven faith. Her heart had a task-driven faith. She was a great person. She opened her home to Jesus. She was ready. She wanted to serve. She wasn't an evil person. She wasn't a bad person. It's just that her heart had a task-driven faith. Her heart wanted to show up based on what she did, on the tasks that were at hand. That was the most important thing. She wanted to impress Jesus. Martha wanted to impress. Now, we don't know exactly why she wanted to do this. What was the heart behind that faith, which we're going to learn today. But she wanted to impress Jesus. But I want to give us a fair warning because I've been there. You see, only people that aren't impressed by Jesus worry about doing things to impress him. It's only people that aren't impressed by Jesus that worry about doing things to impress him. You see, in this moment, Mary was at Jesus' feet just listening to Jesus. She was in awe. She had a faith that was connecting with Jesus at a certain level, at a different depth, and she wanted to do things, but she just couldn't because she was just so in awe, so impressed, so convicted by Jesus' presence. Of course, Mary knew how to do things. Who here is the younger brother of the family or the younger sibling? Yes? Do we have some younger siblings? Yes? Do you know what it is to have an older brother or older sister or something? Yes? They always tell you what to do, right? It's always lands on you. That's always my fight with my kids. It's like, well, sometimes the other way around because you say that Adriel is the favorite. Yeah? Your heart will heal today, my son. Your heart will heal. But you always have more people telling you what to do. And of course, Mary was used to this. She had to go to work. But in this moment, she just couldn't. She was just there. To her, Jesus was just not another person, not just another important person. You see, to Mary, we could see that even though she had people always telling her what to do, for her, Jesus was just not another person telling her what to do. It wasn't just another person in authority. Martha's heart, a task-driven faith, she saw Jesus like somebody else to serve and to impress. Like just somebody above her as well, somebody more respected than her, somebody more. And so Jesus will just be another person to serve until you realize that Jesus is here to impress you. You see, Jesus is here to impress his love on your heart. Jesus is here to impress his wisdom on your mind. Jesus is here to change your life through the power of his testimony. Jesus is here to impress your life and not the other way around. And so this is where we're at. This is exactly where Jesus is taking us by the hand, so we realize that the heart that was a task-driven heart, like society, like our family, like our world in general, for us not to have a task-driven faith. Because this is not what that faith is all about. Now, how can I have the nerve to say that our faith doesn't require us to do things? If I've given my testimony and I know that I'm here and I'm serving and I'm inviting people to volunteer and to serve, how can I say that our faith doesn't involve tasks? Well, of course it does. There are many things to do in our faith and many people to serve, and there's just too many overwhelming things if we wanted to do a list. But don't get it twisted. And I want you to see this on screen. You see, Christianity is not about doing things because we have to. It's about doing things because Jesus asks us to. There's a big difference. There's a huge difference. Christianity is not doing things because we have to. There's not a list that says you have to do this to be a Christian. You see, Christianity is about conviction, not about change, not about doing. It says, if you believe in your heart, it doesn't say if you do A, B, and C, then you're a Christian. Oh, no. It's about conviction. The second you believe that Jesus is the only way, boom, it happened. It's in your heart. You didn't have to do anything. It's about conviction. So, yes, when people come to me and say, how can you say that Christianity doesn't ask you to do this and there's so many things to do? Absolutely. But the heart behind it is different. Come on. The heart behind it is different. The heart behind the faith. There are many religions. There are many ways. But as I mentioned last week, there's a special onlyness, uniqueness to the heart behind Christianity. There is something special. Now let's talk about time-driven faith. Time-driven faith. There is a Latin expression that says tempus fugit. Tempus fugit. And I want to put it there so you can read it. Tempus fugit. Have you ever heard of the term time flies? That's where it comes from. Tempus fugit. It's the opposite of carpe diem, right? Of seize the day. Tempus fugit is this ideology that time has something to do with how we live. Time affects everything that is around us. And Albert Einstein became famous because he has a theory called the theory of relativity, where he was able to prove in theory that time is actually not a constant, it's relative. So we think that everyone lives time the same way, and he was able to prove that that wasn't the case, that the only constant is the speed of light. And I don't want to go into that because I'm a geek, you know this. I'm a nerd, and I can go into it. I love this. But let me just give you an example, several examples, because this is a very important point, because Tempus Fugit is happening in the heart of Mary right now. And I want you to understand this, because there's a heart behind the faith. There's a time in the faith that we have to understand that it's different from Chronos. It's a Kairos time. And I want us to really understand this Tempus Fugit in our hearts, because it is so important. It was not the same to me to spend hours on a date with Chris that felt like nothing, or 1 minute in a classroom that felt like an eternity. Have we been there before? You see, because time is relative. Einstein put it this way: if you have two siblings, one is on Earth and another one is on a spaceship traveling at the speed of light, after 1 year, they would age differently, or after 10 years, they would age differently. Why? Because of the time is relative, because now you're in a spaceship that is traveling, you're surrounded by something, and it keeps you within the time happening in that spaceship, not other way around. Again, I don't want to get too geeky on you, but this is amazing, super interesting. But what is happening? What is happening in this moment? Okay, another example. I have a good one. There's a comic, and then they made movies called X-Men. I told you I was a geek, a nerd, you see? And there's this character called Quicksilver, right? He's like the Flash, but cooler, in my opinion. And I'm a reverend, so I know these things, But okay, Quicksilver, and his ability as a mutant, he can like move super quickly. Have you seen that movie or no? Yes? And there's this scene right in the movie, and he's moving so fast that everything just stands still. And he can mess with people, right? He can mess, because he's moving so fast, and everything just seems to stop. Quicksilver, Einstein, theory of relativity, Tempus Fugit. Man, you guys are smart. This is good. But something happens where if with time, something happens when you realize that something happens in God's presence. When it's a time-based faith. When it's spending time with Jesus, something outside happens where we start moving at a different speed, at the speed of light, and something in our world of darkness just stops. You see, Jesus entered the home, and it was the same house where Martha and Mary were. All three were there. They were the exact amount of time. But Martha felt so stuck, that so many things to do and things weren't getting done. And Mary felt like it was a fraction of a second. A fraction of a second. In her heart, time was flying. Her life was completely focused and devoted on what Jesus was saying. And in this moment in her life, of course, there were things to do. There were very important things to do. She was breaking all these norms. She was not doing what she was supposed to be doing. They had probably prepped. Martha probably told Mary, as the older sister usually does, hey, be ready. They're coming. We have to impress them. The house has to be clean. This needs to be done. And Mary's like, yes, I'm going to do my best. Oh, man, I can't wait to meet Jesus and serve him and give him a glass of water and do this. And then Jesus walks into the room, and she's like, and she can't do anything else, because she's in Jesus' presence, and Jesus and these two sisters starts addressing two different hearts. One that is a task heart and one that is a time heart. She's showing Jesus her heart by the time that she's there. And she can't help it. She can't do anything about it. She just can't. Because it's a time. It's a time thing. It's a time thing. And now this story is awesome. I love this, and I can go on and on. But what's the connection? What's the message? What's the heart behind the faith? As I'm studying this and I'm seeing all this popping out of the Bible, my heart goes to like, okay, but what does all this mean? What could Jesus see that I can't see? What was Jesus seeing in Martha, which was an amazing person, a great person, and in Mary, who was a great person, even though she dropped the ball in a sense, right? She wasn't doing what she was supposed to do. What is Jesus seeing? And as I'm in a time of devotional and prayer, I start, almost like remembering things, and I feel like God is guiding me somewhere. And I know this is going to sound kind of weird, but Chris and I, we are really into like murder mysteries or like unsolved things. She's more into it than I am, and then she takes notes of like how they killed this person. I'm like, why are you taking notes? She's like, just in case, babe, just in case. But all these murder mysteries, and I see it, I'm captivated because I grew up in a medical family. My grandfather was a doctor, my uncles are doctors, everyone's, they're oncologists and they're surgeons and they're all this. And so I grew up in this atmosphere. I worked 7 years in a cancer research hospital. And so all this, I studied medicine 1 year and I loved it. I loved it until God said, hey, I got something better for you. And I dropped out, but it was amazing. And medicine has always been. And so when I see these, I'm reminded about all this. And one thing really popped out. And it's a lesson that I learned one time about scars. One time I had the privilege of being in a surgery, helping actually in a surgery with a kind of rising star of a plastic surgeon he was in LA, but he came to TJ to do a special surgery on somebody that had a tumor removed, and so they did a reconstruction surgery. And so I was able to help there. And so as they're there, in the final part of it, he actually asked everybody except the anesthesiologist if they could step out of the surgery room. And I was really taken aback by that. And we all stepped out, and he finished up, and that was it. And then I asked my uncle, who is a surgeon, and I said, why did he do that? And he says, in our community, if he was able to figure out a special way to suture, it's his intellectual property. So he can ask people to leave, and he'll finish up, and nobody knew how he did it. So the scars are just so different, so delicate, so they figure out a way to do it. And that always stuck with me. And you can always tell, scars tell a story. Scars tell a big story. And it is interesting because in some cases, like I learned, you can even know who healed that person or who treated that person by the scar that it was left. If it was this way or that way or this thick or this thin, some surgeons in the circle even know. Now, what does all this have to do? Why am I suddenly talking about scars? Why, if we're talking about the heart behind the faith, are we diving into scars? You see, Jesus, right after Luke chapter 12, he goes into Luke chapter 15, and he tells a very powerful parable. A parable, not to make it obvious, but instead of two sisters, of two brothers and a father in a house. And the younger brother tells his dad, Dad, I want my entire inheritance. Now, I want it now. I can't wait for you to die. I want it now. The father gives his son, and he goes out, spends everything, lives life, and is completely devastated, in crisis. And he reminds himself, hey, there's people working for my dad that live better than I do. I'm just going to go back and ask him for a job. This is the story, obviously, of the prodigal son. He comes back to the house. The father is there, runs out to meet him. He makes a party for him, restores his life, and we know the story. But there's that second part of the story with the older brother. The older brother hears the commotion and asks somebody and says, what's going on there? And the worker says, super happy, your brother's back. They're doing a party. We don't have to work right now anymore. He's like, what? And so he stays outside. Somebody tells the dad, and just like the dad ran out to see the younger brother, the father runs out to meet the older brother. He runs out and he tells him, he says, what's going on? Why can't you be happy? And he says, Dad, I've never done anything to shame you. I've always worked. I've always been here. And you never do anything like this to me. And in that moment, we're thinking, wait a minute, Jesus, if the Father is God, how can God be this bad? But the Father wasn't bad. He tells him something that shows us the heart behind the faith. In Luke 15, chapter 15, verse 31, this is what the father replies to his son that probably his younger son had never heard before. But he tells him in verse 31, my son, the father said, you are always with me. Don't you realize this? Time. You are always with me. It's not a task. It's a time thing. The father tells the older son, open your eyes. You have always been with me. And everything, he says, I have is yours. Because it's not a task thing. It's a time thing. It's a being with God thing. Sometimes we come to God because we need that miracle. We come to God because we need that answer. We need that favor. We come because we need something and we're like, I'll work for it, Jesus. I'll work for this. We don't realize that our faith is about spending the time with God. Spending the time with God. Our being with God is what's most important about our faith. It's not how much we can do or what we're doing or what level of belt our Christianity is. It's about being with God. It's about letting just time fly with Him and our lives soar. And so Jesus in this parable shows us soul wounds, something that makes us react a certain way in another. Now, Martha and Mary, both of them had lived some part of their lives, and because they've lived, they've already had soul wounds. They've already been scarred. There's something happening there in their hearts because Jesus wants to address the heart behind the faith that He's bringing to their lives. When He teaches using the parable of the prodigal son, what is He talking about? He's talking about the wounds of the heart. He's talking about what the younger brother has lived that has hurt him, that has marked his heart. And He's talking about the older brother, what he has lived, what has marked his heart. He's talking about the pains of the heart, the soul wounds, the heart behind the faith. Even before talking to them about the kingdom of heaven, even before teaching them about the Savior and heaven and hell, He talks to them about their heart. You have to understand the heart behind the faith. You see, there is something there. There is something there that we have to learn. And I want to leave you with this final phrase for you to understand and to bring all this together. You see, a scar does not give testimony of how the wound happened, but of how it was healed. The scar doesn't give a testimony of how that wound happened. The scar actually talks about how it was healed. And just like I learned with certain doctors have a certain way, it can even tell you who healed you. Who addressed that issue? At the end of these two stories, I asked God, I'm like, why do you leave these two stories in a cliffhanger? In Luke chapter 12, Jesus tells Martha, Martha, she chose better, and this will not be taken away from her. And what did Martha say? What did she do? And then in Luke chapter 15, Jesus shows us this story, and the father tells this to the son, and that's how the story ends. What did the older brother do? How does the story end? Don't leave me like this. Like when I lost internet one time, I was watching a movie. You know, that's the worst. You're like, what happens? What happened? How does it end? What happened to Martha? What happened to the older brother? What happened in these two stories that are so the same? And God said something to me. He said, David, whatever they chose. Whatever they chose. You see, salvation is a choice. You just have to receive it. Spending time with God, being with Him is a choice. Whatever you choose, that's what happens. Whatever you choose, that's what happens. Now I know for a fact that we've all lived through things. And we all have these wounds, these scars. And maybe our family hurt us. Maybe we don't fit it quite in. Maybe it's been friends or society, but we have these wounds in our hearts. And Jesus, before challenging your faith, before wanting to give you those upgrades, those challenges, before addressing your faith, He wants to sit down with you, spend time with you, to talk about the heart behind that faith that He wants you to have.